No, you're not, mate. You're not. Okay, people. Someone just tried to gate crash the panel. You have to earn it. Yeah. Now it sounds really, really strange to say, will you all please be quiet because the punks are going to speak, but that's what's going to happen. When we were putting this together, when we had the idea, it was to celebrate books that we loved, that we thought people should know about, because there's so much going on, and it's sometimes hard to get attention. I've been a fan of Bitzy for way longer than he knows. I'm not a child of 1977. I'm more a kind of a Skids and Ruts and XTC type of person, and I was aware of the Strougers at the time. I never got to see the Strougers, but I'm a major fan of the sound of that band and of the attitude. So with Bitzy Fitzgerald, I always forget to introduce the panels, so look the stuff up. And then P.A. Jones, who I think is an essential figure in keeping that flame of punk alive in Ireland, and that ever-changing flame of punk, because it's different for everyone. And both of them wrote books that really struck me as being wonderful pieces of literature, but also quite dangerous, quite thrilling, but sometimes you feel like, am I learning too much about this person? Like they're very raw, they're very open. There's more guts in them than I would be willing to reveal. So thank you both for that. Peter wrote the first autobiography of any member of the Dublin punk scene. So that's important. And then Bitzy, you've written the second one, and together I think they're important. But Bitzy, if I can start with you, out of your book, your mother emerges as a remarkable woman in a very, very unusual country. So, can I start by asking you about your mother? What was she like, and what do you think she made of the life that she was handed?
Well, my father was killed when we were all children, so that would be in 1965. So I was 5 years of age. So she was left with 6 kids. We were piss poor. I mean, there's no getting away from it. 4 brothers sharing the one bed, and overcoats, blankets, stuff like that. No food. I mean, people probably think this is something from the Dickensian times. It was in North Dublin, in a fairly well-to-do middle-class housing estate, where I thought as a child, as you do, everything is normal. But we were all taught never discuss any business outside the family. Sounds like the mafia, I don't understand. But internalise everything, which is how all my brothers and sisters, we all got this real serious independent streak. So my mum was left with 6 kids. My father's brother was a priest, who in those days was, so can we not put Bitzy and Mary into an orphanage and we take the pressure off you? So my mum was the glue that kept the family together. Like, I had no idea how she managed to do it. She had been a school teacher by profession, and she went back teaching in Dominic Street, where I wasn't school going age yet. So I would have to accompany her to school, and then when she finished school, she'd have to go and clean the logo on the street outside Roach Stores, which I mentioned in the book. I used to shoplift there later on as a teenager. So yeah, it was tough. Looking back now as an older person, you try to understand how did we manage to get through that? Because I'm sure there was people where I lived in a lot worse condition, which I found out later on there were. But with 6 kids, she kept us all together. We all went through school, and some of us finished school and some of us didn't. My brothers and sisters went all on to get great jobs, but my father was never spoken about, ever. He was the elephant in the room. The only time he'd speak about my dad was if I was being bold, which was often. your dad was alive, he would fucking knock that, you know, the usual. So I think she was probably so distraught and so hurt that we couldn't mention it for the pain that she was going through. I'm sure it must have been painful because they'd only just celebrated her 15th wedding anniversary, and we'd also lost a baby sister, Anita, maybe a year before my father was killed. So it was all this pain, no money coming into the house, and putting old shoes on the fire during the winter and stuff like that. I thought it was great. You know, when you're a kid, you think this is fucking marvellous, you know, throw more shoes on there. I mean, at one stage I think I was wearing Wellington boots the whole year round because I didn't have any other shoes and literally no arse in my trousers. So, yeah, it's still the same.
And you also mentioned that your mother played piano, and at one stage the piano went on the floor.
The piano was dispatched into the fire in the winter of '68. I'll never forget it. Now, it had a lot of woodworm at that stage, a lot of keys were broken, but yeah, I dutifully smashed it up with a big hammer and an axe outside and put it into the fire. It was great.
And you mentioned that music was seeping into your life from various people in your family, and there weren't that many working class women who were school teachers in Ireland at that time, so I can imagine the amount of industry that went in to allowing your mother to get trained as a teacher in the first place. But did you play piano? Do you remember the type of music that you were listening to as a young person?
The Ink Spots. She had 5 sisters, so they all sang the local choir in Wicklow where they were from in Rathdrum, so we didn't know how to play piano. And probably a lot of people here, when you're kids, the relations would come up and you'd all sing your party piece, a few drinks taken out, and everybody would be singing. My mum would be there on the piano, clink, 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 and whatever else. My father was a singer, a baritone, so they would sing regularly at weddings and stuff like that. So you had the Ink Spots, you had a lot of hymns, a lot of church hymns, because she was a God-fearing Catholic, you know. And the big three, the Gardaí, the GAA, and Fianna Fáil, not necessarily in those, in that order, but there was always music. And then, of course, I was the youngest of 6 or 7, and my brothers then, I listened to the Beatles and the Kinks, and you know, the old box record player. Whenever they'd go out, you put on the Beatles. I mean, from the age of 6, I can vividly remember each album, the Beatles album my old brother Mick would have brought home. You know, to Sgt. Pepper, Revolver, and Rubber Soul, and all. Not necessarily knowing exactly what they meant. And then he would have brought me then to see my first gig, which was Skid Row in the bandstand in the Hollow in Phoenix Park. So that was in '71, and everybody, you know, all the hippies as they were in those days, and giving it all of this and smoking loads of dope and weed, which obviously I didn't know, I knew later on, was prevalent. So yeah, I loved all those records. The Bee Gees, Massachusetts, all of those 3-part harmonies just stuck with me. There was music, there was instruments in the house, there was accordions, pianos, there was guitars, whistles, barrel-ons, so there was just music all the time from the get-go.
Yeah, and when I was introducing you, I was going to mention, you know, the list of bands you're in, but I thought the panel's not that long, you know. But you start off with the Strougers. You start off in that moment where, you know, we go from where we had Rory Gallagher and Horse Flips and Skid Row, and we don't export music, so there are local bands that tend to do quite well, but you don't grow up in Ireland wanting to aspiring to be a pop star. Where did you meet the other Strougers, and where did you feel, I could do that, I could be on stage?
I suppose there was a friend of mine, Dennis Chopper Horn, as he used to colloquially known. We formed a band in '76 called The Slum. Now, we never made it out of the garage, probably just as well. So you go to your local sports hall, your youth hall, and you meet up with people, and I'd already heard New Rose by the Damned. That was that was a wake-up call for me. It was the day after my 16th birthday. It was on John Peel, so I was up and running already. I was getting the NME then at 16 and 17, and wondering what the fuck is this music, and you know, the hairs in the back of my neck when I heard that. You know, she really going out with him and John Peel playing it. And I remember listening to that and saying, what the fuck was that? So, a friend of mine, Cian Hynes, asked me to listen to a couple of songs off the Ramones' first LP, which I'd heard anyway, and went up, auditioned, bang, and I was in, and that was it. And punk in those days was very insular. Like, we were riding on the coattails of the British punk movement. Like, none of us were wearing the clothes that you'd see people wearing now, you know, the mohawks and the studded jackets and the zip trail. We just wore the clothes that we wore. I worked on the dreaded assembly line in Lucas batteries, where you'd have to, part of my duties was mixing sulfuric acid in the lead acid battery, so my jeans were falling apart. And that's what I wore on stage. And nowadays people go into town and buy fucking jeans with fucking holes in them, which I don't understand. So that was the sort of the DIY thing, and there weren't many punks in town because I wasn't really calling myself a punk rocker. I didn't have mohawks. I just wore the clothes I wore every day. You'd see people individually looking really creative in the clothes that they wore, like people wearing polythene bags and bin liners, but pretty soon it was becoming uniform, which is when I drifted off. That was after 18 months to 2 years. But very, very soon, especially where I'm from, around the Navan Road, there was 15, 20 bands.
Yeah.
Anybody that couldn't play was game. Just get up on the fucking stage, hit your guitar, be bass beat, little bit in tune, and off you go, up and running. And that's the way it was. And to answer your question again, nobody wanted to go out and be a rock star, but it was so accessible. Punk rock became so accessible. Even the bands that would come over, like Buzzcocks, the Damned, the McGonagals, these are people that you could actually have a chat with after the gig. You know, and that was it. You can go out and do it. You can do this. You can go do that. Like the Ramones, it was so easy. 3 or 4 chords, bringing it all back to basics for people like me who would never get a chance to fucking be anything. And you can say, well, look, I was up there for fucking 15 minutes.
Yeah, and also when the Ramones play in Cabaret, they dedicate a song to the Strougers.
I'm still dining out, and that'll be across the road later on. So we blagged our way onto their tour bus, and I think we were probably a Ramones tribute band in those days without even knowing it, because there was 8 or 9 songs by the Ramones in the set, and 4 or 5 originals. So we got on the tour bus, and we had a bag saying the Strougers faster than the Ramones, which they thought was fucking great. And Dee got us on, and we played the demo tape for them, because we did a cover of Blitzkrieg Bop, and he came on and just dedicated the 4th song in amongst complete fucking mayhem. The gig broke out. Yeah. So yeah, he said this was for the Strougers, and I just stood there while they played 125 songs in half an hour. That's all I remember from that gig.
And one of them was for the Strougers. Now, you mentioned the violence. The punk scene in Dublin was incredibly unpleasant, incredibly violent, because people saw punks or anyone who was alternative as a target. And you're right about that in the book, about, you know, the gigs, you know, the cabaret, you know, you didn't know who was going. You're right about the magnet, which is mythologised now, but I interviewed one of the lads from DC9, and he said we had a rule that when we'd go and play in the magnet was that you didn't smoke. But all of you smoked back then. I said, yeah, but you didn't smoke walking down Pierce Street, because you'd have your last smoke on the bus, and if you were walking down Pierce Street smoking, someone would say, oh, it gives us fag. And if you didn't, they'd kick the crap out of you. So that was not a place that you would go for a pleasant stroll on an evening. And you know, you write in the book about playing there, about going to gigs, but like, what did it feel like? That the music you really liked the people you really liked, you knew that when you got up on stage, or maybe put your pint on top of the amplifier, you know, it's a good chance you were going to get your head kicked in, and the only crime was that you loved music that wasn't mainstream. So what was it like going to gigs back then and hanging out?
I mean, you put that very well. Dublin gigs were extremely violent, and I really fucking violent. The first thing I always did in any venue was look for the exit.
Yeah.
And stay in close proximity, because it was going to kick off anyway. Because in those days, everybody would be spitting at the band. And you think about it, you're fucking spitting at people on stage. It was fucking mental. So when we played, people would be spitting, and I'd be in the audience more often. Marcus of Queensberry rules with the punters. While maybe Dennis Russ was doing a 5-second guitar solo, managing to get back on stage unscathed. The violence was heavy. Again, Pearse Street, the Magnet, they would press the traffic lights, all the locals, stop the cars, and basically kick the fucking shit out of you. Like chains, bottles, knives, you name it, knuckle dusters. And there's no way I'm a fast runner, so like, I was fucking up that street more often than not. The Outcasts, legendary gig there. I think Greg, a girl headbutted Greg in the nose. Somebody tore the cistern off the toilet wall, threw it at the band, and the band could handle themselves. So they
pulled the radiator off.
Yeah. Euphemistically speaking. I hope Pete Holliday's not here. So so the radiator was dragged off the wall and deposited over someone's head, but it was extremely violent. Sometimes I didn't want to go, but it was just the adrenaline rush, you know, when you're 18, 19 and you're bulletproof and you just want to go to all of these gigs that you hope that you're not going to miss. Yeah. But I think a lot of it was violence just for the sake of it.
Yeah.
You don't look the way I look, or you're supposed to look. And then it was the punk police coming in, and you know, everybody started looking the same. And you know, even with, like Steve was here, but as I said, I was up and running along a lot before anybody else, and I would have gone to see the Radiators and the Rats in Moran's Hotel, Smile Bulging on the gigs, and they didn't run for very long. I think the live music finished there in the late '78. But that first wave was quite menacing and threatening. You know, it was like as if you'd just been dropped in from outer space, because people were venting their spleen or whatever was going on in their personal lives as well. Come Saturday, you'd be in the Dandelion Market, or Saturday and a Sunday, Toners, the Bag It In, Tommy Dunn's Tavern, places like that. And as I said earlier on, sometimes a gig would break out amongst all the violence.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, and I thought you wrote about it brilliantly and really viscerally. Like, you could feel the menace in the air, and no one should look back and think, oh, I wish I was around to go to all those gigs. You wouldn't have gone, and if you went, you mightn't have come back. You know, but we kind of, I suppose, we felt a sense of duty. I thought, if the Skids are coming to Dublin, I have to go there. And I remember going to Cabra, so I cycled to Cabra from here, and I thought there was a reasonable chance that I would die at the gig. Genuinely, I thought someone's going to stab me in the back at this gig, but my God, the last single's so good. You know, I have to be there, and I have to show these people that not everyone in Dublin is an animal who will attack you just for being alternative. There's a huge amount of darkness in your book, and I'm not discussing it here because it would be a different, you know, it'd be a different panel. But thank you for kind of opening up your soul and for bearing. So there's a lot of darkness, there's a lot of sadness, there's a lot of paths in life taken that don't work out well for the people involved, but there's also an amazing redemption of someone who goes to see bands, who thinks being in a band is actually a really, really productive way of being. And there's a great scene, and there's a lot of people here who are a big part of putting on gigs, of making Dublin, making Limerick, making Cork much better places, because you roll up your sleeves and you allow people like me to go and see great bands. What drew you back in to the 72 bands that you've been in, the last couple of years?
When I came out of addiction, I started getting back into the music. So I went to a bar in Church Street, which is in North Dublin, the Tap, and there was a band on called Primitivo, and I knew a couple of the guys that were in the band, and I was with a pal of mine, and it just fucking hit me straight away. I said, I need to get back into the music. I was away for 30 years, so I got back into it. I immediately said, right, I'm going to call the band the Lee Harveys, because I'd use it as an observational piece on things that are happening in America, the good and the bad, and also because I would have issues getting into the States, so I could say basically whatever I want and slide them off without too much trouble. So yeah, I got the band quickly together. They've been around for I think maybe 16, 17 years. That man is a member, and it was very DIY, just like the way it should be. I think 2 weeks, we had one rehearsal, 2 rehearsals, and we played our first gig in the Thomas House. And we went in, and there was a fucking power cut, of course, in Thomas House. And we had to go out and liberate some street lighting to put them on the stage and hang them out of the ceiling. And the gig went down quite well. So a lot of people lent a hand. It was still that ethos that was, borrow your amp, can we use your amp? Yeah, can we use your kit? We had the likes of Ray Burke down there who promoted the band big time, did some fantastic reviews. Poster Fish Promotions, Freedom Will News put us on in the very early days when she ran gigs in this bar off Bolton Street, and of course Peter there, through his FOAD music, put us on loads of times. So I just started writing, and I think we did 4 or 5 albums, I think, Peter, was it?
Something like that.
We played everywhere. We played the UK and Scotland, mainly the UK and Scotland, Rebellion many times.
Yeah. Did we actually play in Scotland? That gig.
Well, the band played
the band was on stage in Scotland. I'm not convinced of playing.
Physically, you went into the rider out of the fridge. Allegedly. So yeah, and we've done Rebellion a lot of times. So the band are on hiatus at the moment, while I'm in another band called the Deviators, which 31st of May Grand Social, 7:30. Thanks very much. That's the debut, and I'm in Brendan Lyons, who is a former current Trouble Pilgrim on Radiator, and he was in a band called The End, and Andy Keaton on drums. So it's just come full circle, the music for me, and music is absolutely fucking brilliant. There's music for everybody. I don't care what music people listen to. I'm not a musical terrorist. I mean, during the halcyon days of punk rock, I fucking loved ABBA, I loved the fucking Bee Gees, I loved you name it. I wasn't care. Oh, you can't fucking like them. Well, fuck you. I'll wear what I want to wear. I've always more or less worn that. I've never been into the. I remember I got 35, 40 years later, I got myself a mohawk and I looked fucking ridiculous. I bought a pair of fucking jeans with zips on them. I looked absolutely worse. Because I don't want to do things when they're fashionable. The way I'll do something on the QT later on, so the only concessions I'll dine me fucking barns.
Yeah, but the zip pants, there's a story in that as well, isn't there?
Well,
that you bought a pair, you thought this isn't right.
And I went out and I bought a couple of zips myself and just fucking made me own. And then got my own t-shirts and put a couple of holes in it here and there, because people are paying top dollar for, you see people with Ramones t-shirts and they don't even know who the fuck the Ramones are, which is absolutely sacrilege, in my opinion,
Sacrilege Art just shows that those bands had such great graphic design that even if you don't know the bands, that you'll go to Pennies and you'll pay $5 for them. So I think it proves we won as well. You know, so there's no loss in that. But you know, you mentioned PA, who again, like he's in
Agent provocateur.
yeah, you know, who's in more bands than you are.
Yeah.
But I think a really significant fact from the book, or takeaway from me, is that the doors of punk and DIY are open to everyone at any stage. It's not just for snotty 18-year-olds. You know, and to me, that's the greatest thing about punk. It's the greatest thing about DIY, is that there's no judgment. It's just whenever you're ready to do it, and you don't need anyone else. You can find that. But the perfect segue to PA is Zips.